Desperate for solace, Ellen summons an unseen force. Instead of comfort, she unleashes an ancient evil. Driven by loneliness, she binds her soul to this monstrous entity for eternity. Then, the unseen presence erupted. Its icy grip tightened around her neck, choking off her cries, as the evil consumed her. A few years later in Germany, Ellen lives a quiet life in the small town of Wisberg with her husband Thomas Hutter, a real estate agent. One morning, she jolts awake, gasping for air as the remnants of a vivid and unsettling dream linger in her mind. Nearby, Thomas is already preparing for work, his movements hurried. Ellen tries to share her unease, the weight of the dream pressing heavily on her. But Thomas offers only a comforting glance before brushing off her concerns. Her plea for him to stay goes unanswered as he slips out of the house, already running late. Left alone in the silence, Ellen's thoughts grow darker. She can't shake the dread that Thomas's superiors will soon send him far away. Thomas arrives at Nock Amp, Associates estate agents, where his superior, Herr Nock, greets him warmly. Nock congratulates Thomas on his recent marriage before quickly steering the conversation toward business. He reveals an intriguing deal involving a foreign Count Orlok, a shadowy figure from an ancient noble lineage. The Count wishes to retire in Wisberg and has set his sights on the crumbling Grunwald Manor. Nock entrusts Thomas with finalizing the deal, instructing him to travel to the Count's remote castle in Transylvania. Thomas hesitates, uneasy about leaving his newlywed wife so soon, but the promise of a substantial commission and a potential promotion weighs heavily on him. Reluctantly, he agrees, unaware of the dark path this journey will lead him down. Determined yet conflicted, Thomas approaches Ellen to convince her to accept his 6-week journey. Ellen, visibly distressed, hesitates as if she has already foreseen this moment. Gathering her courage, she shares the haunting dream that has left her shaken. In her dream, she describes marrying not him, but death itself, a sinister figure, surrounded by her lifeless loved ones. Yet, instead of sorrow, she feels an unsettling joy in their presence. Thomas, brushing aside her fears, reassures her it is just a dream and reminds her that his journey is for their future. To ease her mind, he arranges for Ellen to stay with his wealthy friend Friedrich Harding and his pregnant wife Anna. Their home, filled with the lively laughter of their 2 daughters, Clara and Louise, seems a safe and comforting refuge. Before leaving, Ellen gives Thomas a locket containing a lock of her hair, a token of her love. With a heavy heart, Thomas mounts his horse and sets off. Far away, in a dimly lit chamber, Herr Nock kneels before a twisted altar, performing a dark ritual. His whispered incantations reverberate with sinister energy as he communes with an unspeakable evil. After a long and grueling journey, Thomas finally arrives in Transylvania. Seeking refuge in a small village shadowed by jagged mountains, he finds himself met with suspicion and ridicule. The atmosphere turns icy when he mentions his intent to visit Count Orlok's castle. Desperate for shelter, Thomas offers to pay double for a room. Reluctantly, the innkeeper agrees, though the villagers persist in warning him to turn back, their voices trembling with fear. Undeterred, Thomas brushes off their superstitions, determined to complete his mission. That night, strange sounds lure Thomas outside. Drawn to a flickering glow in the distance, he stumbles upon a chilling scene in the moonlit graveyard. A naked woman is led on horseback, her presence ritualistic and foreboding. Villagers surround a freshly unearthed coffin, their expressions grim and determined. The coffin's lid lies cast aside, revealing a decayed corpse. Without hesitation, a villager raises a sharpened stake and drives it through the heart of the lifeless body. Horrified, Thomas shouts to stop them. The villagers turn toward him, their faces shadowed and accusatory, their eyes filled with both fear and warning. Thomas wakes to an eerie silence, the village abandoned and his horse missing. Uneasy but resolute, he begins the trek toward Count Orlok's castle. The path winds through dense forests, shrouded in mist, and just as doubt begins to creep in, a driverless carriage appears, its black horses snorting and restless. With no other option, Thomas climbs inside. The carriage jolts forward, speeding unnaturally fast through the dark terrain. It stops abruptly at the gates of a foreboding castle, its towering silhouette framed by the pale moonlight. Count Orlok himself receives Thomas. Orlok explains that his attendants are unavailable. The grand hall is dimly lit. Orlok urges Thomas to set out the manor deed. As Thomas unpacks the documents, Orlok offers food and drink, his piercing eyes never leaving his guest. When Thomas mentions the bizarre ritual he witnessed in the village, Orlok waves it off with disdain, calling it the product of backward superstitions and filthy traditions. He speaks longingly of retiring to a more refined and civilized land. Thomas, while eating, accidentally cuts his hand. Suddenly, Thomas feels the room and statues sway around him. His vision distorts and he struggles to stay upright. Thomas wakes the next morning to find the castle in utter disarray. As he pulls his shirt aside, he sees on his chest a fresh bite mark. Unease gnaws at him, but he presses on. When evening falls, Orlok presents a deed written in a foreign language that Thomas cannot read. With an unnerving calm, Orlok urges him to sign as the solicitor to finalize the purchase. Still unwell and disoriented, Thomas hesitates as he is feeling sick. But Orlok then places a bag of coins, Thomas's promised commission, on the table. This weakens his resolve, and Thomas reluctantly signs. Orlok's eyes shift to the locket hanging around Thomas's belt. He asks to see it, lifting it to his face and inhaling deeply. Something about the gesture sends a chill through Thomas. After his job done, Thomas declares his intention to leave the castle. Orlok, however, disagrees, insisting it is a terrible omen to travel while ill. The next morning, Thomas wakes in even worse condition. He checks the bite mark to find it still raw and fresh. Determined to escape, he stumbles to the castle door, only to find it locked tight. Thomas, searching for another way out, is led into a chamber where he finds a coffin. His hands trembling, he lifts the lid and recoils in horror. Inside lies Orlok, pale and grotesque, his flesh rotting. Summoning his courage, Thomas grabs a nearby pickaxe and raises it high. Before he can strike, Orlok's eyes snap open, and with terrifying strength, he overpowers Thomas. Miles away, Ellen succumbs to a trance-like state. Her body stiffens, and blood begins to seep from her unblinking eyes as Orlok's sinister voice echoes in her mind. As her connection with Orlok deepens, Thomas's fate is sealed. Orlok sinks his fangs into Thomas's neck, feeding with an unrelenting hunger as the night plunges deeper into darkness. Back in Wisburg, Friedrich Harding grows increasingly concerned about Ellen's deteriorating condition. He enlists the help of Wilhelm Sievers, a skilled but perplexed physician. Despite his best efforts, Sievers struggles to make sense of her condition. As Ellen's episodes intensify each night, he resorts to sedating her. Even in her drugged state, she mutters the same haunting words over and over. "He is coming." Meanwhile, Thomas wakes in the castle. His body aches from Orlok's attack, but survival instinct overtakes him. He sees wolves about to attack him. He acts quickly, throwing himself out of the window into the river below. Back in Wisburg, Ellen's distress grows unbearable. Harding attempts to locate Thomas and Herr Nock, but finds no trace of either. To make matters worse, Ellen begins experiencing violent seizures again. Elsewhere, Herr Nock is finally found, raving mad, after slaughtering 3 sheep with his bare hands and consuming their raw flesh. He is restrained and transported to the mental hospital under Sievers' care. But questioning Nock proves fruitless. He speaks only in cryptic, frenzied phrases, calling out to his lord. In a chilling display, Nock bites the head off a pigeon. Then he starts saying that he is coming, same as Ellen. Suddenly, Nock lunges at Sievers as the orderly tries to push Nock away. Ellen's condition spirals downward. Sievers, deeply troubled, confides in Harding about his old Swiss professor, Albin Eberhard von Franz. Once a respected academic, von Franz had been ostracized by his peers for his obsessive studies of the occult and the supernatural. Sievers, recognizing similarities between Ellen's affliction and Nock's madness, suggests seeking von Franz's expertise as their last hope. Far from Wisburg, Thomas washes ashore and is discovered by a nun from a secluded monastery. She brings him back, and the sisters nurse him with tender care. The nuns sense something dark lingering around him. They warn him gravely, believing he is marked by an evil presence, and implore him to stay within the sanctuary's protective walls. Despite their warnings, Thomas cannot ignore his overwhelming desire to save Ellen. Resolute, he chooses to leave the monastery and return home, knowing he must confront the darkness threatening her. Meanwhile, Count Orlok begins his own journey to Wisburg, smuggling himself aboard a merchant ship under the cover of night. Along with him, he brings plague-infested rats. As the voyage progresses, the ship's crew falls prey to the deadly disease. One by one, they succumb, their bodies riddled with fever and lesions. The captain and his men struggle to fight both the spreading illness and the creeping dread until none are left. Sievers and Harding visit Albin Eberhard von Franz for help. Franz agrees to help after recognizing Sievers. After spending time with Ellen, Franz diagnoses her as being under the direct influence of Count Orlok, a malevolent force whose roots lie in ancient unholy practices. Ellen confesses to Franz that Orlok has haunted her since she was a child. She warns of the imminent arrival of Orlok. Harding, ever the skeptic, struggles to accept Franz's explanations about Orlok's supernatural nature. But Ellen experiences another violent seizure that night, worse than any before. Elsewhere, Herr Nock escapes the mental hospital by killing an attendant and preparing for the arrival of his master. Thomas arrives at the Hardings' residence, frail and weakened, and collapses at the doorstep. Meanwhile, the cursed ship carrying Count Orlok crashes into Wisburg's harbor. Swarms of plague-ridden rats pour from the wreckage, spreading through the city like a living tide. Orlok takes residence in the manor he purchased, attended by Nock. The next day, Wisburg plunges into chaos as a deadly plague ravages the population. Bodies pile in the streets and fear grips the survivors. Sievers and Franz inspect the corpse of a sailor found among the shipwreck's debris. To their horror, they discover a massive bite wound on his neck, unlike anything caused by disease. Franz grows grim, confirming their fears. This is no mere plague. Something far darker has taken root in Wisburg, and it hungers for more. As night falls, Thomas is tormented by vivid, haunting visions of Orlok. In a moment of panic and confusion, he pushes Ellen away, telling her to leave him be. Ellen, heartbroken and frightened, seeks solace with Anna. She quietly thanks Anna for not giving up on her, for offering her refuge in the midst of her unraveling sanity. Franz, in his study, connects the dots with chilling clarity. The true source of the plague is not merely disease, but the legendary vampire Nosferatu, an ancient evil being that feeds on life itself. As Anna sleeps, Ellen is visited once again by Orlok. He steps out of the darkness, his grotesque form filling her vision. He reminds her of the pact she made long ago, one that binds her to him. Ellen finally sees Orlok for the monster he truly is. But in that moment of clarity, she finds strength. She refuses to comply, her love for Thomas burning brighter than the terror Orlok instills in her. Orlok issues his ultimatum. Ellen has 3 days to divorce Thomas and give herself to him. If she refuses, he will continue his merciless slaughter, and all who are dear to her, including Thomas. Suddenly, Ellen awakens. She looks to Anna, only to find the horrific sight of plague rats swarming over her friend's body, feasting on her body. As the plague tightens its grip on Wisburg, the hospitals overflow with the infected, many writhing in feverish delirium. Desperation runs high, and Harding, in a haze of helplessness, tends to his wife Anna, whose mind is unraveling with terror. Ellen, frantic and determined, tries to explain to Harding that the plague is no ordinary illness, but the work of a demon. She pleads with him to see the truth and understand the supernatural force at play. But Harding, consumed by his own frustration and fear, snaps. He demands that Ellen leave his house, taking her husband with her. Ellen carefully tends to Thomas in their home. Thomas urges Ellen to leave the cursed city with him. Ellen, however, shakes her head and tells him they cannot leave. She confides in Thomas about her past with Orlok, the haunting connection that has bound her to the Count since childhood. Orlok gets into Ellen's mind to push Thomas away, but it doesn't work. Thomas and Ellen share a moment of passion as they reaffirm their devotion to one another, a declaration of love that ignites Orlok's fury. Elsewhere, Anna awakens to the sound of her daughter's terrified screams. She shakes Harding, desperately trying to wake him, but he remains unresponsive. Heart racing, she runs to her daughter's room, only to be met with a nightmare. Orlok is feeding on their young, innocent lives. Anna's scream echoes through the house as Orlok turns his gaze to her, his eyes gleaming with malice. At the funeral for Anna and the children, Harding is hollow-eyed, his grief immeasurable. Thomas approaches him, accompanied by Sievers and Franz. He reveals the bite wound on his chest, proof of the horrors he has faced. Harding, though shaken, listens as Thomas explains the truth about Orlok and the danger he poses. In the carriage, the group devises a plan. They will find Orlok's resting place during the day when he is at his weakest, drive a spike through his heart, and end his reign of terror. Unbeknownst to the others, Ellen and Franz have a secret plan of their own. Ellen knows that she is the only one capable of killing the demon due to the connection she shares with him. She and Franz conspire to use the hunt as a distraction for Thomas, keeping him safe while Ellen faces Orlok. Ellen gazes deeply into Thomas's eyes. She makes him promise not to return until the evil is vanquished. Her plea is heartfelt, giving her the time she needs to face Orlok alone. Meanwhile, Thomas, Sievers, and Franz regroup, but Harding is absent. Harding, consumed by despair, has gone to Anna and his daughter's tomb. There, he kisses Anna's cold lips, yearning for the same fate as his family. He wishes for death to claim him, hoping to join them in the afterlife. Thomas and the others eventually find Harding's lifeless body lying beside his wife. Thomas grieves for his friend and then sets the bodies on fire. With heavy hearts, the trio presses on to Orlok's manor. Inside, they find a coffin surrounded by plague rats. They remove the lid, and inside lies a figure. Believing it to be Orlok, Thomas drives a spike through its heart, only to realize it is Knock. The deranged servant, on the verge of death, reveals that Orlok has already set his sights on Ellen. Horror and fury wash over Thomas as he realizes that Franz lied to him. Realizing the urgency, Thomas and Sievers abandon the manor, rushing back to Ellen with every ounce of speed they can muster. Knock, left behind, takes it upon himself to destroy the source of the plague in the manor. Meanwhile, Ellen welcomes Orlok and seduces him. She pledges herself to Orlok, and the two lay together and have sex, all the while Orlok feeds on her blood until the morning comes. Orlok realizes too late that he has been tricked as he screams in agony, while he bleeds and shrivels into a corpse while he is being held by Ellen. Thomas arrives just as her life begins to fade away. He weeps while holding her hands as she dies peacefully, knowing she was able to save her beloved. Franz arrives and apologizes to Thomas, saying that thanks to Ellen, the town was spared from the plague of Nosferatu, and the story comes to an end.